Now, This Week with Bob Mueller on News 2.
This week,
we must be absolutely clear about what is true and what is a lie.
President Biden points the finger of blame squarely at former President Trump on the one-year anniversary of the assault on the U.S. Capitol and democracy.
Because his bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution. He can't accept he lost.
New polling shows 88% of Democrats reject Donald Trump's claim that the 2020 election was rigged, while 62% of Republicans embrace it.
We have the tools to protect people from severe illness due to Omicron.
President Biden addressed the nation this week on the rapid spread of the Omicron variant. More in our This Week cover story.
We brought 1.6 million test kits and actually distributed them within a matter of days to all of our school buildings to be able to support both staff as well as students.
Omicron is spreading at amazing speed, setting records for cases while new weapons are added to the fight.
2 years almost now we've been in this pandemic, and we have tracked it from the very beginning. My thoughts are that we should continue doing that. We've got to follow this. We've got to make sure that we know what's happening out there on the ground.
Per capita, Tennessee led the nation in new cases of Omicron this week. Governor Lee details the state's response. Hello again, and welcome to another edition of This Week. COVID cases, specifically the Omicron variant, are exploding across the country, prompting President Biden to address the nation. More in our This Week cover story. And later, a look at the anniversary of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. But first, a look at the other political headlines of the week. As booster shots become more available for children, it's giving some school systems hope of a little more normalcy. But for now, questions across the country remain. ABC's Rena Roy has the latest.
More protection against COVID-19 now available for more Americans, with the FDA authorizing Pfizer's booster shot for 12 to 15-year-olds. Top agency officials saying the third dose is safe for that age group, adding risk of the rare heart condition myocarditis will be extremely rare.
In the setting of a tremendous number of Omicron and Delta cases in this country, the potential benefits of getting vaccinated in this age range outweigh that risk.
This as millions of children go back to school after the holidays. Cities like Chicago, Boston, and New York tightening COVID safety measures to try and keep everyone safe.
We brought 1.6 million test kits and actually distributed them within a matter of days to all of our school buildings to be able to support both staff as well as students.
Some parents concerned about in-person learning.
I'm worried about his safety, I'm worried about the teacher's safety, and I'm worried about the community safety. And I think we could do it differently. And I'm disappointed that the administration hasn't decided to do it differently.
Other cities like Atlanta, Milwaukee, and Newark are going remote temporarily, with COVID cases skyrocketing coast to coast more than 200% in the last 2 weeks. Now over 400,000 reported a day, more than ever before.
We are definitely in the middle of a very severe surge and uptick in cases.
Dr. Fauci saying the CDC may now update some of its new guidance, potentially recommending people with asymptomatic infections and no fever to get a negative test before ending their isolation at 5 days. Rena Roy, ABC News, New York.
Although COVID-19 vaccines are highly effective at minimizing severe symptoms caused by the virus, vaccine effectiveness decreases over time. That's why boosters are being recommended. News 2's Alex Dennis spoke with a local infectious disease doctor who's answering the question, can you have too much of a good thing?
The Omicron variant now surging through Tennessee is sure to infect more people, and soon, says local infectious disease doctor Ima Ahonkai.
And the fact that this is happening right in the middle of holiday season where we're gathering and traveling. And so there's sure to be a fallout from that. And the hospitals are certainly bracing themselves to be ready to deal with that.
Which is why she encourages people to give their immune system a boost as soon as possible.
Because of their vaccine response, they will clear that infection out of their system sooner.
As people line up to get their series of COVID shots and boosters, we ask, can you overprotect yourself unintentionally, doing more harm than good?
No, is the short answer. There's an entirely separate pathology when your immune system does not know how to turn off when there is something stimulating it. And in the case of autoimmune diseases, that thing stimulating it is something normal in your own body.
Dr. Ahunkai encourages those with questions to reach out to medical professionals, and she reminds fellow physicians to be patient with those still hesitant to roll up their sleeve.
Information is changing, and I think taking some responsibility on the side of the public health community, that we need to be really intentional about how we explain this information, because there can be so much loss in trust if that's not done effectively.
Alex Dennis, News 2.
When talking about who is responsible for the spread of COVID-19 through Tennessee, one prominent state Democrat has strong words. Representative Vincent Dixie, the House Democratic Caucus chair, posted on Twitter calling the spread of COVID in the state, quote, a direct result of Governor Bill Lee and Tennessee Republican Party-led General Assembly policies enacted through a special session a year ago. They are literally killing Tennesseans. The rapid spread falls squarely on them. Governor Lee talked about the current Omicron surge, saying they are tracking new numbers on hospitalizations differently than they did with the Delta surge.
Hospitalizations do not equate in the same way that they did to numbers of cases. That's a good thing. So we just are going to watch this going forward and continue to encourage people, protect themselves, get their vaccines, get their boosters.
Now to our This Week cover story. Cases of the COVID-19 Omicron variant are so out of hand. President Biden addressed the nation about it this week. ABC's Rena Roy shares new concerns from the White House.
President Biden ramping up the fight against COVID as the Omicron variant drives this winter surge.
These coming weeks are going to be challenging. We have the tools to protect people from severe illness due to Omicron.
Biden doubling the government's purchase of Pfizer's COVID antiviral pill from 10 to 20 million treatment courses.
These pills are going to dramatically decrease hospitalizations and deaths from COVID-19. They're a game changer.
The CDC estimates the Omicron variant is responsible for 95% of new cases across the country as of January 1st, compared to less than 1% just a month ago. Over 100,000 infected Americans are now hospitalized, more than double the total from early November. And as millions head back to school this week, there's growing concern for America's children, with 325,000 kids testing positive for the virus last week alone, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics.
We need to help work with each other to help keep each other safe. So I'm begging people to get vaccinated.
More of America's youth could get boosted as early as this week, with the CDC expected to sign off on booster shots for 12 to 15-year-olds.
Booster shots work. They significantly increase the protection. They provide the highest level of protection against Omicron.
Federal health officials also recommending everybody 12 and up originally vaccinated with Pfizer get their booster after 5 months instead of 6.
Be prepared, protect yourself, get vaccinated, get your boosters. I was reluctant at first, but I am glad that I did.
Rena Roy, ABC News, New York.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Welcome back to This Week. It was 1 year ago this week the nation watched as a pro-Trump mob attacked the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to halt the counting of ballots in the U.S. Senate that certified the election of Joe Biden. The Trump supporters believe the former president's false claims of election fraud and a stolen election. It's now a year later, and not a lot has changed.
In the most searing remarks of his presidency, President Biden today squarely blamed former President Donald Trump for the insurrection, dismantling Trump's big lie piece by piece.
For the first time in our history, a president had not just lost an election, he tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power as a violent mob breached the Capitol. But they failed. They failed.
Biden said Trump's assault on democracy started well before January 6th with a, quote, web of lies.
Even before the first ballot was cast, the former president was preemptively sowing doubt about the election results. He built his lie over months. Wasn't based on any facts. He was just looking for an excuse, a pretext to cover for the truth. He's not just a former president. He's a defeated former president.
Biden described the horror the U.S. and the world saw, but he also described what we didn't see.
We saw with our own eyes rioters menace these halls, threatening the life of the Speaker of the House, literally erecting gallows to hang the Vice President of the United States of America. But what did we not see? We didn't see a former president who had just rallied the mob to attack, sitting in the private dining room off the Oval Office in the White House, watching it all on television and doing nothing for hours as police were assaulted, lives at risk, the nation's capital under siege.
Biden accused Trump of choosing himself over his country.
His bruised ego matters more to him than our democracy or our Constitution. He can't accept he lost.
The president condemning Republican leaders for enabling Trump's lies, noting many were eager to challenge the results of the presidential election, but didn't question that Republicans won races up and down the ballot, from House to Senate to governor.
They challenged none of that. Somehow those results are accurate on the same ballot. But the presidential race was flawed. And on the same ballot, the same day, cast by the same voters.
Biden today vowing to defend American democracy from Donald Trump.
I did not seek this fight brought to this Capitol 1 year ago today, but I will not shrink from it either. I will stand in this breach. I will defend this nation, and I will allow no one to place a dagger at the throat of democracy.
And Biden was asked why he didn't call out President Trump by name. He told reporters that he didn't want this to turn into a political battle between him and the former president. But Biden said what happened that day cannot be ignored. He said great nations face the truth. They face it, deal with it, and move on. Mary Bruce, ABC News, Capitol Hill.
1 year after a pro-Trump rally led to a riot, insurrection, and attempt to halt the counting of election ballots at the Capitol building, polling shows the great political divide between Republicans and Democrats over what happened that day remains, and in fact has widened. The poll also found some in both parties say violence against the government is sometimes justified. The poll by the Washington Post and University of Maryland found 4 in 10 Republicans and independents answered yes when asked if violence against the government is sometimes justified. Here are the findings. Among all U.S. adults, 62% said violence is never justified, while 34% said sometimes violence is justified. 4% had no opinion. Among Democrats, 74% said violence is never justified, 23% said sometimes it is. Among Republicans, 54% said violence is never justified, but 41% said sometimes it is. 5% were unsure. And among independents, 57% said violence is never justified, 40% said sometimes it is, and 3% were not sure. The question was also asked, does Donald Trump bear a great deal, a good amount, just some, or none at all amount of blame for the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol? Among all U.S. adults, 60% said a great deal or a good amount. 38% said just some or not at all. Among Democrats, 92% said a great deal or a good amount of blame, while 7% said just some or none at all. Among Republicans, 27% said a great deal or a good amount, while 72% said just some or none at all. And among independents, 57% said a great deal, a good amount, while 42% said just some, none at all. As for the president's claim of a rigged election and widespread voter fraud, among Democrats, 88% said there was no proof of widespread voter fraud, while 62% of Republicans said there was proof of widespread voter fraud, and 74% of independents said there was no proof of widespread voter fraud. Tennessee's 7 Republican congressional members were part of 147 Republicans who all supported Trump's unsubstantiated and debunked claim of election fraud by objecting to the election results that won Joe Biden the presidency. Tennessee Representatives Diana Harshbarger, Tim Burchett, Chuck Fleischman, Scott Desjardins, John Rose, Mark Green, and David Kustoff all objected to the election results. Those who took the poll were also asked if the protesters who entered the Capitol on January the 6th were mostly peaceful, mostly violent, or equally peaceful and violent. Among U.S. adults, 54% said mostly violent, 27% said equally peaceful and violent, while 19% said mostly peaceful. Among Democrats, 78% said mostly violent, 17% said equally peaceful and violent, while 5% said mostly peaceful. Among Republicans, 26% said mostly violent, 36% equally peaceful and violent, 37% mostly peaceful. Among independents, 55% mostly violent, 27% equally peaceful and violent, 18% mostly peaceful. And finally, the question was asked, in states where the government is mostly controlled by one party, Democrats or Republicans, how confident are you that state officials will accept the results of an election if their party loses? 67% of those in states controlled by Democrats were very or somewhat confident. 32% were not too or not at all confident. While in states controlled by Republicans, 48% were very or somewhat confident, while 50% were not too or not at all confident. Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Welcome back. This week, Tennessee led the nation in per capita cases of the Omicron variant. Mask mandates could be reimposed if Governor Bill Lee declared a state of emergency. But the governor says not yet. Here is more from the governor on COVID and a new funding formula for Tennessee public schools.
You know, 2 years almost now we've been in this pandemic, and we have tracked it from the very beginning. My thoughts are that we should continue doing that. We've got to follow this. We've got to make sure that we know what's happening out there on the ground. Very encouraging news in the current surge. Hospitalizations do not equate in the same way that they did to numbers of cases. That's a good thing. So we just are going to watch this going forward and continue to encourage people, protect themselves, get their vaccines, get their boosters. We're in a really different spot in the pandemic than we've been in a couple years for the past couple years. So we're watching it, we're tracking it. We're encouraged about some parts of it, but we keep moving forward. So I think the emergency declaration is a tool that we should use only when we have to. And there are a lot of things that go into the calculation for when you would do that. The first and foremost of those would be the number of people that are in the hospital. And our hospitalizations relative to where they have been in past are significantly lower. But we're not in a spot where we believe that a state of emergency is necessary, but nothing's off the table. We track it all the time.
Is there a certain threshold of hospitalizations where that would really change that?
It's hard to say exactly what that threshold would be. It would be a combination of events that came together, including those hospitalizations, and we'll just be watching that as we go forward. This rewrite of the funding formula is entirely focused on public schools. It is funding for public schools. The current funding formula we have is 30 years old. It is long overdue for a rewrite. We are one of only a few states that continues to fund students the way we do. We need to change that. We need to be our education system has certainly changed in 30 years, and we need to not only increase the level of funding that we put into our public schools, but we need to do so in a way that effectively utilizes those dollars. So it's not just more money, it's money well spent. And that's our strategy and our approach going forward. It will benefit public schools from one end of the state to the other. We have engaged stakeholders, hundreds of them, multiple town halls from one end of the state to the other, a process that's occurred over the last 4 months to engage the public and to engage educators, engage stakeholders to make sure that we heard all of the concerns and to weigh that in to our calculation as we determine a new funding formula. Clearly, we need to put more funding into public education. We've increased our funding every year since I've been governor. We'll do so again. So there will be more funding in public schools. And now, with the passage of this new formula, that funding will be more appropriately distributed as it should be.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us. That will do it for another edition of This Week. We hope to see you back here next weekend for another edition of This Week, and you have a great week.